Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here or catching the replay. My name is Jenna, and I am your host for this lecture, monologue, however we want to think about it. This is adoption and astrology, or astrology and adoption. Say astrology and adoption. I don't know if this is going to turn into like a weekly thing or what, but here we are again, a week after episode 1 with episode 2. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is incredibly nuanced and something that's very important for us to really lean into the nuance and the fact that this is a topic that is unique to each individual's journey, each individual's situation and experience, and how we feel about it changes over time. And that topic is search. And the astrological lens on this is the courage to search. So search, as I explained in the description, takes many forms. And a lot of times when we talk about search, for adoptees, people, or general public assumption is we're talking about searching for first family. I'm going to be using a lot of adoption competent or conscious language, so bear with me, and I'm going to try to honor the full range of scope with a lot of these terms. So when we talk about first family, we're talking about biological family. Another word for this is natural family. So using those terms interchangeably, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the family from which the adoptee originated, and the ties to some degree were severed, whether that's through an open adoption where legally they're severed, however, perhaps there's still a relationship there, all the way through closed adoption where very little information sometimes is known. But we're not only talking about searching for biological family. We're not just talking about that. Search is such a broader topic than that. And even if we are talking about searching for biological family or biology or biological relatives, reunion is a completely separate discussion. Sometimes, adoptees will engage in search and not find what they're looking for, whether that was biological relatives to reunite with or not. Sometimes adoptees engage in search and are met with blockages, boundaries, no contact orders. Sometimes we're also met with graves, very real situation. Sometimes we're also met with no information. And a lot of times intercountry adoptees especially can have a lot of trouble because the paperwork is just not there. It doesn't exist. It wasn't done, or it's falsified. But that's getting really into the nuance here. My goal here is to leave space for search to mean whatever it needs to mean for the individual. Not all adoptees have the same search needs or the same search desires, qualitatively or quantitatively. Sometimes search is something that we're like, oh, I really wanted to figure out, what my ancestry was. Oh, I took a DNA test and it came back with these answers. That's enough for me. Or other people might be like, I found out that I'm actually part of this indigenous population, or I didn't realize that I had ancestral roots from this region. I would really like to learn more about those roots. And then this takes us on a philosophical or a historical journey, or some sort of somatic journey where we're connecting with rituals, with food, with stories, with history, with myths, all sorts of different nuanced ways for us to qualitatively and quantitatively engage. Sometimes search can also look like an internal inquiry, asking ourselves how we feel about what happened, or what we remember, or what we don't remember. Sometimes that's actually even more telling. What have our memories blocked us from for the sake of preservation? I know many adoptees who share experiences of not remembering most of their childhood. And it has nothing to do with it being overtly traumatic, even post-placement. or it did and they still don't remember, or it didn't and they don't remember. Sometimes search is just looking for these parts of our stories, these parts of ourselves, these parts of our constitution that either haven't been available or seem a little bit further away from us than we wish that they were. Sometimes search can look like asking ourselves, like, how do we feel about this memory? Maybe we processed it or thought we processed it already, but we'd like to go back and revisit that. How do we feel about some truth or some narrative or some conversation? Where can I feel it in my body? And how has that experience shaped me as an individual? This is a lot of great questioning for internal inquiry. What does it mean that I can viscerally remember certain moments in my experience as an adoptee? Why is it that I can tap into that memory so well, but it was just a moment in time? It was just a passing comment from someone. It was really getting curious about our experiences. This explanation about the nuance of search can really help us see that search is such a separate experience from reunion. And sometimes the type of search we're doing will involve reunion as either a goal or a milestone or a checkpoint. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's completely different or irrelevant. And we're talking about more than just the traditional topic of search here. So we can also, attribute or pay tribute to the fact that this could have a goal of biological reunion, and it could also be centered around cultural reunion, but search doesn't have to involve that. Or it can be a blending of all these things. It can have an internal approach. It can have an external approach. It can have a out in the world factor to it as well, or just be one of these types of things. And reunion can be reuniting with ourselves, with our truth, with our authenticity, reuniting with our voice. That's a big one. A lot of adoptees that I've worked with, not all, I'm not speaking for all adoptees. I want to make that known. This is my shared experience of myself, as well as my experiences with other adoptees in my community. But a lot of times reuniting with our voice can be a really powerful step in adoptee consciousness and healing. Sometimes reunion isn't even relevant because what we're searching for is something that we've never actually had a union with. So there's a lot of conversations and opportunities for conversations about the nuance of the word reunion. Who am I being united with? What if, my birth family, what if some of them didn't even know about me? What if my birth father didn't know about me? What if, we're reuniting, or maybe that could be a word for that experience, but there was never a union initially to exist. So there's so much to unpack in this conversation that I want to make us aware of and set that foundation that this is a conversation that's very deep and very nuanced and very unique for each individual. There's also the idea of searching for emotion regulation. This is going to be the first deep dive here, because emotion regulation is such a big topic in childhood experiences that are ruptures or disruptions or adverse events. There is an expert, I'm pretty sure I mentioned him in the last video, Paul Sunderland. He talks about, there's a specific lecture, I will link it after in the notes, about how our brains as adoptees, as especially relinquished infants, he goes into, our brains are locked into a state of arousal. So this is going to be pretty much a quote from this lecture. He calls this complex PTSD, being locked in this state of hyperarousal. So he says complex PTSD is when the brain thinks that the traumas of the past are still happening, as if that's the truth of the situation. Past dangers, threats to life, they feel very present. So the brain acts as if the trauma is either still happening or it's just around the corner. And our autonomic nervous system, it's designed to protect us, that ends up kicking in. And you could have heard of fight, flight, freeze, fawn as well, which fawn is actually codependency. Fawning is aligning oneself, subordinating one's needs, aligning yourself to the other in order to feel safe, um, to feel looked after. And the autonomic nervous system is throwing up the F's, the four F's, throws up these responses in order to protect us. And the problem here with complex PTSD is that these F types, the fawn response, freeze, flight, or fight, gets locked into the on position. So you're locked in this state of protection. And the hypervigilance around protection is mutually exclusive with connection and being present. So if you're in this state of hypervigilance and you are acutely aware that you feel threatened by a lack of connection, but then you're not able to actually reach out and make that connection because you are not present in your reality, because you are in an activated state, you see how it's like a catch-22? It's very jarring and difficult to process things for someone who has this kind of baseline state within their neurology. So you cannot be protected and connected at the same time. You cannot be hypervigilant and be present. Hi, Debbie, I saw you in the chat. Thanks for being here. It is a great and brave topic. I completely agree. Brave is perfect for this because we're rolling with the Aries clan, Mars, Aries, and the first house. So it's interesting to think about being locked into this state of hypervigilance and what that means within the archetypal expressions of Mars. So when we're talking about Mars as the ruler of Aries, its affinity with the first house, that's called the Aries clan. So when we're looking at this clan, the high expressions here are like warrior or survivor or this daredevil, some sort of like heroic level, like a leader of some kind, but a heroic leader, a pioneer, someone really, that life-giving, life-sustaining, life-defending energy there. The lower archetypes have more to do with kind of the opposite of everything I just said. So being a bully, taking things to the extreme, being really reckless and like a reckless fool with things, or being in this like chronic state of emergency, which kind of echoes what I was just talking about from Paul Sunderland's lecture. We can also see chronic victimhood as like a lower expression here. So we can start to see that through this astrological lens, there's this environmental push within complex trauma to associate with, project, and completely embody and internalize these lower archetype expressions of Aries, of Mars, of our ability to assert ourselves. So searching for emotional regulation, which could be something that someone who is adopted, this also is applicable to more than just adoptees. Other people, I'm sure, need emotion regulation help too. There's also parallel experiences or experiences that overlap, such as anyone who's had a disruption in care as a child, whether that was through foster care or another type of intervention, or a disruption in care that wasn't quite as formal as having the government involved, but maybe like a kinship care situation that was very informal, but there was still that severance or that inconsistency among care given. We also see this in cases with donor-conceived people. There's starting to be populations speaking out about the overlap with adoption trauma and relinquishment trauma, as well as surrogacy. But I will let those populations speak for themselves. I just want to say that you are all welcome here. And if you find any of this applicable to you, by all means, go for it. Take what you like and leave the rest. So when we're searching for emotion regulation, what we're really doing is searching for the ability to be present. Because ultimately you cannot regulate without being present, and to be regulated is to be able to be present. When we spend a lot of time not being present, we can have very limited opportunities to integrate our experiences into ourselves, to integrate new knowledge, new information, new goals, new experiences. In Ayurveda, we talk about digesting experiences into wisdom. That's a type of integration. But again, it requires us being present. That's why in Ayurveda, we talk about the slowdown at the end of the day, having rituals that allow you to deeply process. We talk about in Ayurveda, this is a side quest, a tangent here, nod to the other show that I do with Kimber on Mondays. But in Ayurveda, we talk about how at the end of the day, you really do want to be digesting your day and looking it over and gathering and gaining wisdom from your experiences, which is why we fast at the end of the day. Fasting not only food, but fasting sensory experiences, like no screaming lights in your eyes at the end of the day, low lights, low music, don't watch TV to wind down, all those types of things that really help us to center around the action of being present so that we can do this digestion of experiences just as we digest food into energy. So back to this, searching for the ability to be present. There's also, if you haven't been present enough, if you haven't been able to regulate yourself enough, if you haven't been able to be in the body, in your experiences, having autonomy enough, search can also mean engaging the question, who am I? Now, that sounds really simple. However, anyone who has engaged this question, especially as an adoptee, can attest to how unsimple this question is. So with that question, we have like a real direct tie into Mars via the first house here, because the first house is, in traditional astrology, we say the house of I am. So if you're saying, who am I? That's big first house work. So we know with the first house themes here, we're really considering the reality of positive and decisive action. There's a correlation in this house with leadership as well, just like we talked earlier about leadership. We all have a first house in our astrology charts, and we all have a leadership style to at least some degree or some level of authentic leader expression, whether it's dominant in our life and our constitution, or maybe it's less center stage. We are all leaders to some level or some degree. So from there, we think, well, every leader, however you identify with that word, is familiar with the at least hypothetical situation where there's a hard choice that needs to be made. Hard choices, we live in an imperfect world, and sometimes leaders need to make tough decisions. Maybe it's about a limited resource, or there's a judgment call to be made, or decisions, where fairness isn't always an option. And the leader might feel terrible about that, but perhaps unfairness is simply the best choice among the options that are actually available. Now, what if we apply this to our own healing, to our own presence, to our own emotion regulation? What if that decision relates to it? What if our own identity or our own ability to lead our lives is what we're actually leading through, what we have at stake here? What if the unfairness is about projections of feelings or inadequacies or unresolved wounds in other people, things that our leadership decisions are going to stir up for others? And what if those people are also the very same people who were responsible for, or we'll call them the leaders of our lives, of our survival prior to that? AKA, what if the people who were worried about treating unfairly, or who are saying they're being treated unfairly by our search, by our journey, by our inquiry, what if those same people are our parents? So this brings us to the topic of divided loyalties. This is a big topic in adoption, and a lot of times it has to do with the way our biological parents, our natural parents, our first families can feel, and our adoptive families can feel when we're trying to hold the both and have relationship with both. Acknowledge, yes, I have my adoptive family and they are the people who raised me and I'm in contact with them. I have this type of relationship with them. We still have these traditions together and these happy memories together. And I am searching for my truth. I am searching for more information. I am searching for my biological roots, my ancestral roots. I also would like to hold and make space for this part of my story. And what can happen is within divided loyalties, the two sides don't understand, well, why do you need both of us? They feel threatened by each other. Usually a lot of times there's unresolved grief under that, whether it's the grief of the family that had to relinquish, or in cases where it was a non-consensual rupture, there's grief around that loss. Even if it is consensual, there's grief around the loss. A lot of times, especially birth mothers, are not prepared for the level of grief that they are going to experience. It's simply just part of the industry. And then on the other side of it, what if the adoptive family has grief? A lot of times we talk about the adoption as, you know, the option available to people who experience infertility. And what if there is grief around that infertility that hasn't been processed? What if there were losses before this adoption or even after that haven't been processed? So the idea of divided loyalties is very real. And a lot of it has to do with projecting onto others the feelings and the triggers that are coming up as that person is engaging in their own journey, in their own decision making, in leading their own life. So with the leadership aspect of Mars, we know that a good leader makes a call. This is, remember, we talked about decisive action. So we need to make the call. Are we going to engage in this, even if other people might feel it's unfair? Even if, let's just say it is unfair. Let's just give that reality the floor for this time and say, yeah, this is unfair. It sucks. I don't want to make my family feel this way. I don't want to have this impact on them. However, I also need to make this tough choice for my own self, to answer these questions that I have, to figure out who am I on a deeper level. The Aries clan also has to do with selfishness. Now, that's such a tricky word because it's thrown around a lot when people do things that harm others, whether it's intentional or unintentional, impact versus intention. There's an element, though, here of enlightened selfishness within the Aries clan, within Mars, within the first house, where we are encouraged to do things because they are in our own best interest. When we project an excess of selfishness onto adoptees who are engaging in search, that's where things become tricky. And it's kind of like, whose is this to hold? But what's important is with the Aries clan, the Mars clan, every single one of us, not just the adoptee in this hypothetical situation, but every single one of us has a natural right to be selfish. And it's called enlightened selfishness. You have the right to live your own life and to make decisions that are healthy for you. It doesn't mean, cause harm to another person for yourself, but it means it's okay to do things that put you as top priority. You need to behave in a way or in ways that reflect the Aries clan wisdom here of personal autonomy and your natural right to live the life that's right for you. We can't always be living our life for other people. Divine self-love, yes, that's a great term for this as well. Enlightened selfishness reframed, divine self-love. I want to touch briefly on dark martial energy because I think it gives us the whole scope. But basically, we can see dark martial energy as the opposite of the assertive action. So, and the opposite doesn't just mean one thing. Opposite of appropriate defense and appropriate protectiveness. So, in a word, the dark martial energy is aversion or avoidance, meeting a situation in that extreme. So this is where it goes both ways. So extreme rage, we're truly avoiding the courage to tap into those vulnerable feelings or those vulnerable places, or to show up in a way that, leaves room for us to become even further damaged or victimized or wounded. So showing up with extreme rage is dark martial energy, and the extreme fear is the other side of that. Both of those are opposite of assertive action. And the extreme fear would have us showing up as a victim, as a perpetual victim in all situations and kind of helpless. So you see how that aversion and avoidance right there, it's the opposite of taking that assertive action. So as we're exploring the topics of search within the astrological framing of martial courage, we can actually approach this in many different ways, taking into account astrology as a tool. So we can talk about Mars in the sky as it is right now, the astrological weather of Mars. What is the frequency of Mars right now, and how would that aid us tuning into that? How would that aid us in engaging or encouraging search? Well, for instance, right now, transiting Mars is in Pisces. So wherever we have Mars energy, it's talking about the development of courage. So courageously engaging Pisces consciousness. It's basically saying right now, as Mars in the sky is transiting through Pisces, there are breakthroughs in consciousness available. We're being really encouraged right now to bravely, there's another Mars word, bravely engage in facing Pisces, psychological or spiritual experiences. And this energy isn't just coming through with demands, it's giving us these Piscean tools as well. So it's saying, with my frequency, with my energy, Mars in Pisces in the sky right now is infusing you with the energy of, the identity of the spiritual warrior. We have this in abundance right now in the sky as well, because Neptune, the modern ruler of Pisces, is in Aries, the sign that Mars traditionally rules, and it's conjunct Saturn. So it's like, focus, stick right here. So that's just a side note. But this is about conscious engagement as the spiritual warrior, not passive, because Aries, it takes the action. It is consciously saying yes. It is ready to go. It is a life force, life-giving energy, not passive. Remember that. So this is about being that hunter, bringing it back to Mars words. We want to be the hunter. We don't want to be the hunted. We don't want to be passive. Recognizing opportunities to be the spiritual warrior and to connect deeply with our consciousness. So this might be coming up for people as like, maybe you're getting some epiphanies about things. Maybe when you are, Mercury's retrograde right now too. So it's already encouraging us to rethink things or revisit different topics. So maybe in your own inner inquiry, or in places where you're searching in your life, whether it's searching for belonging or answers or your voice or your truth, in this Mercury retrograde revisiting, we can actually apply that to this martial energy, because as we investigate and rethink and revisit things, we're inviting these epiphanies to come through. We're actually engaging that Piscean energy of compassionate introspection, of meaning making, of spiritual evolution, of opening up our mind to higher realms, higher possibilities, higher understandings as well. What it looks like to be passive with this energy, for instance, which would be considered the dark side of Mars in Pisces. Remember, we were talking about not engaging consciously. So the dark side of this would kind of look like becoming more of a ghost in your own life, kind of passing by these opportunities, not feeling into your vital life force energy, and instead letting it kind of take you away, dissolving into nothingness, feeling like a ghost in your own life. This is such a loaded term, ghost, for the adoptee community, and I want to acknowledge that for a second, because we talk about the ghost kingdom, which is where, everything lives as the what ifs. So the ghost kingdom, as adoptees are growing up, we reference the ghost kingdom to be like when we daydream about what would our life have been like if we had been adopted by a different family, or if we hadn't been relinquished. And I know that all kids have moments where they're like, oh, I wish I had these parents, or I wish I was living in that family, or I wonder what it would like to be super rich or live in this country, all that kind of stuff. The difference with adoptees is that reality in some way does sort of exist more than for kids who are kept, kids who are not relinquished, kids who don't have multiple families, multiple storylines going on at once. So this area of our mind, of our psyche, becomes very real, and it can also become a very dangerous place if we passively spend too much time there in this what if hypothetical dream area, because what can happen is it becomes kind of like a coping skill, and then that coping skill evolves into escapism, and then we're spending so much time there that we're not actually grounded, once again, in the reality of the here and now. We're not able to be present in our experiences to digest them into wisdom. So we want to, as much as Pisces is very mystical and ethereal and dissolving, and it's all about interconnectedness, we still want to make sure that we are consciously engaging this energy and taking note of it as a leader, a spiritual warrior that is a leader in our development, not a passenger, if that makes sense. There's other ways for us to engage Mars and see it as a tool for engaging in search. And some of these are more available to certain people than others. There are plenty of adoptees with falsified birth certificates or incorrect data or incomplete data. So birth charts, natal charts, the moment that we were born is not always readily available. It can be very hard, if not impossible, to track down. So I do want to name that and be sensitive to that. Mars does move slower than some of the other planets. So if you have a window, even a month window of when your birthday is, can help us narrow it down to at least 1 or 2 signs for Mars. Mars takes over 2 years to move through the entire zodiac. So if the sun takes 1 year and Mars takes about 2, we're talking about 2 months per sign, save for retrogrades. I did want to mention too that it would be an interesting study to see, granted, I doubt this data exists, to see if there are times when search and these inquiries, and I almost said search reunion, if there are times when search is at a more active level, and perhaps those are during Mars retrogrades, because we're talking about the fact that search isn't always an outer action. It isn't always going and finding birth family or going and finding documents or looking for something out in the world. Sometimes search involves going within, searching ourselves, doing that inner psychological, reflective, nuanced work of psychotherapy, of somatic healing, of release work, of, or private things like journaling, rituals, prayer. I wonder if during Mars retrogrades, when the courage is already telling us like, hey, so now we're going to turn this inward, the courage to turn inward, would those be times when people are more actively engaging in search? I would hypothesize, absolutely. There was a very significant Mars retrograde through the sign of Cancer. September 2024, it entered Cancer, and then it started retrograding, and then it went back for briefly into Gemini, but then it was back in Cancer. There was like this almost 6-month period of like, yes, Mars in Cancer. And Cancer is all about home, mother, emotions, ancestry, roots. It's not about psychoanalyzing feelings so much as feeling the feeling. So I wonder if during that 6-month period, there was this like surge within the adoptee community of like, ooh, like there's some stuff coming up, some emotional unearthings as this energy really asks me to get curious and courageously look at, how do I feel about these different situations? What are the truth of my feelings? How can I honor how I really feel about this situation? But that's still transiting Mars. Natal Mars, we're talking about where Mars was in the sky at the moment of your birth. And that would give us a clue as to what our unique goals are for courageous development in this lifetime. Because wherever we have Mars, we know that for the work we're here to do, we were not born with quite enough courage. So in that area of life, both by sign and house, we are going to synchronistically be presented with opportunities through life. These opportunities will find you, so don't worry about missing them. to develop courage. Someone with a particularly loudly Aryan chart or loud positions of Mars will end up having even more and more experiences to develop courage, whether that's, life altering or life shaping, kind of like life threatening experiences more than the usual or the average person would get. It's like, yeah, because you're here to develop courage. And what is courage? Fear and doing it anyways. So sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not courageous because I'm such a scaredy cat. And it's like, well, you know what? The thing about courage is it's less about eliminating fear. It's actually not about that. And it's about doing the thing anyways, even with the presence of fear. So I want to put that right out there, because if the goal, you think the goal is to wait until you're not scared of something to do it, that day might not ever make it. That's not actual courage. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyways. So if you have access to your natal chart, you have access to knowing where Mars was, at least by sign, when you were born, you can cue into, okay, well, if I have Mars in Pisces, it's about the courage to dig deeper into different levels of consciousness, the courage to have this spiritual inquiry, meaning-making inquiry, the courage to see the interconnectedness of all things, the courage to be. Pisces is also very compassionate. The courage to be compassionate, that can be a big one. That can be a huge one. It could take a lot of courage to be compassionate, because sometimes to be compassionate, it can mean honoring your needs and someone else's needs and understanding the intersectionality of them and juggling your emotional constitution or dysregulation at the same time. That takes a lot of courage. That's a lot. We also talk about aspects to Mars, whether your natal Mars, say you have a natal Mars in a sign that's not being occupied right now. I'm having trouble coming up with one. Gemini is one that nothing's in right now, at least at the very present moment. So if you have Mars in Gemini, the courage just to, share your perceptions with the world, the courage to use your voice, the courage to lean into hard conversations, the courage to engage life curiously. These are the things that a Mars in Gemini would be looking to develop courage in over their lifetime. Now, say the moon comes around and the moon's in Gemini for a little bit, you might get this extra emotional drive to go out and engage in the world, different than everybody else, a different trigger than most people would be feeling. But you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to say the thing today because I feel ready to say it. It's still a little bit scary, but I'm going to go with it. I have a gut feeling. That's a lunar pull right there, because it's very intuitive. I have this gut feeling that I should say the thing. Go ahead and say it. Show yourself that you'll be safe. You can say that thing and still be safe and still move through the world. Those are all acts of courage. That's specifically Mars and Gemini. The third way that I wanted to bring up, so we have transits and we have natal charts. The third thing I wanted to touch upon with how we can be developing courage here, how we can be engaging it, is a technique from Andrea at Moira Press here, and it's called astrological remediation. So when we think about Mars and the things that Mars wants, Mars wanting, Mars is about the iron and in your blood and heat and action. So Mars is a very passionate sign. It's a very active sign. Mars wants us to take action. I actually have her book right here. Mars needs instigation, roughhousing, sweat, moving fast, expressing those internal animal instincts. So you can even give yourself kind of like martial exercises to practice, get that muscle up so that you can say, you know what, I am a leader. I can take Mars. I can actually use this energy and, go out into the world and engage. You can, what was it that Debbie said? Divine self-love. These are all ways of exercising divine self-love, engaging martial energy, putting that martial need ahead of everything else in this enlightened, selfish way and saying, you know what, I'm prioritizing this and I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to develop my courage through consciously engaging Mars, showing myself I can be martial, I can be the warrior, I can be a daredevil. And the more we accumulate these experiences, the more we naturally are developing our martial side of ourselves, our leadership qualities, our assertion qualities, our protection qualities, defensiveness too. There's a lot we could use to reframe this here. But ultimately, Aries, Mars, the first house, this is about life choosing existence over surrender or, overextending itself, basically. We're choosing to live. We're choosing to exist. That is the essence of the Aries clan. Aries energy, Mars energy, it's the part of us that's very good at staying alive, is one way to say it. And it's interesting to think about this, bringing it back to the beginning, thinking about this in terms of adoptees, because those neurological the way our neurology develops to be in this heightened state of arousal, that is also Mars energy. This is the part of us that is very good at staying alive. We felt as primal mammal beings that our life was in danger. When you are separated from and completely dependent on from mother, and you are separated from that energy, from your protector, and you are separated from them, you are in a heightened state of arousal because it feels life-threatening. So what is the part of us that's really good at staying alive? Mars. It's going to become activated in a situation that feels life-threatening. So the Aries clan, it has this ability to kind of do everything that it takes in order to stay alive. And the defect kind of comes in when we realize, oh, this brain was wired to think that actually is reality, and that's the common state. So we need to rethink how we're using our martial energy, how we're using our Mars muscle, and actually reclaim it for ourselves, training ourselves to understand we actually are safe, and now we can make different decisions with how to use this martial energy. What can also happen for adoptees who have spent a lot of time overextending themselves into Mars to the point of it becoming almost low expression. It is low expression at that point, where we are so our brains are just wired to see ourselves as victims because we just think we are in a constant life-threatening situation. What can happen is we don't have access to the higher expressions of Aries. And when we do access them, they feel so foreign to us that we're like, this must be unsafe as well. So if you're never standing up for yourself, and then you try to stand up for yourself, that can feel really jarring. And then if you're in a situation or a relationship or a network of relationships or a family dynamic or a community dynamic where you are the person who never stands up for themselves, and suddenly you're trying to lean into this other side of Aries, you're trying to reclaim your autonomy, you're trying to live into your autonomous search for your own truth and your own voice, the people around you can say, excuse me, what are you doing? This is completely inappropriate and you're out of line. And you might believe them because that energy feels so foreign. To lean into it is like, oh, well, that was uncomfortable for me anyway. So clearly you must be right. This is not okay. And I should go back to compromising everything about myself for this situation. But the Aries clan doesn't really want to compromise. However desirable a compromise might be, it's not really a possibility because the Aries clan is about situations in which compromise is just simply not an option. That's because Aries, it's the first sign. It's the initial life. It's the initial fire. We have these this energy around spring where it's like cute little fuzzy bunnies and little birds and da 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 da. But really, when you look at it, springtime is rough. A lot of those tiny cute little furry babies die or are taken as food for other cute little furry babies so that they survive. That is Aries. It is raw, it is primal, it is so intertwined with this survival instinct that we can't pull apart the pieces of it and kind of pick and choose the niceties of Aries. No, we have to take it for what it is. There is the side of Aries that's that force and survival, and I will make it, that survival instinct. But then there's also an instinct with Aries, the instinct to protect those that we love. When we start coming home to ourselves as adoptees, learning who we are and loving ourselves deeper and deeper, that instinct to protect self can start to show up in new ways. And sometimes these new ways aren't super clear to us, like the motivation behind them, or, we're like, why do I feel this way that I've been told is actually harmful or hurtful for other people? And it's like, well, it's because your Aries energy was expended in this other way before. And in order to expend it in this new way, coming home to self, doing search, courageously engaging in your own goals and wishes, and courageously exploring your own life and vitality and truth and roots. Remember, it's about, I have a right to be here. I have a right to live. I choose existence. And what does existence mean? Existence means the entire scope. So maybe things that were taboo to talk about or taboo to engage in or felt seriously life-threatening before, maybe now I'm realizing that I actually am safe to explore things that felt like they were only part of the ghost kingdom before, things that felt like they were off limits because I had to be rooted only in this identity or this family or this relationship in order for myself to feel whole, in order for myself to feel sustained or able to survive. And now I'm going out and I'm evolving as a person, and my courage is evolving, and what I want to look at is evolving. What I want to engage with courageously is evolving. So we need to give ourselves some grace here. We need to allow ourselves to be messy in this and allow ourselves to show up in ways that sometimes other people aren't going to like. Remember, enlightened selfishness. That's a lot what we're talking about. So, Debbie, I love your comment. I didn't realize your Mars is in Pisces. I think I did. Happy Mars return. It's coming up, or it's here. I don't know your degree. But all right. So with that, I told my kids I would wrap within the hour. We're at 48 minutes. Thank you so much to everyone who's here. I really appreciate this conversation. And until next time, have a great week.